While Disney has yet to make any kind of official comment on the South Park episode lambasting Kathleen Kennedy, rumors about what the reaction was behind closed doors have begun surfacing, and we're going to relay what we heard in this video. By Monday, October 29th, Gina Carano's tweet about what the South Park creators might expect following the release of joining the Panderverse started getting some press, and very little of it was in any way favorable to Carano. For instance, the comicbookmovie.com salvo was titled, "Fired the Mandalorian star Gina Carano shares bizarre anti-Kathleen Kennedy tirade following South Park parody." Now, the actionable words here are that Carano was fired, so the reader should assume she was no good, and furthermore, she went on a tirade described as bizarre, so the reader should also assume that she's unhinged and not at all to be taken seriously, and that is from the headline alone. In other words, it's a hit piece aimed at discrediting Carano, presumably as a means to the end of protecting the embattled Kathleen Kennedy. And here's the thing to keep in mind. Dropping such a hit piece would be consistent with the reaction we've heard the South Park special got within the halls of Disney and Lucasfilm. In this editorial, I will go through what we have heard of that behind-the-scenes reaction, which also happens to be consistent with what Gina Carano said in the tweet Kennedy's article-writing defenders labeled as bizarre and unhinged. Then we'll go through Carano's response to the most recent bout of attackers. And finally, why what Carano has to say should have Kathleen Kennedy far more worried than anything in this South Park episode. First of all, please be advised that what I'm about to go through right now is information that has been relayed to us by a number of sources with access to different levels of information within Lucasfilm and Disney. Since none of this has been published in the trades, it cannot be independently verified at this time, and as such, what follows must be treated as rumor and taken with the usual grain of salt. That mandatory disclaimer out of the way, what we have heard is that the powers in Disney and Lucasfilm, like everyone else, knew the episode was coming and they knew it was going to have a go at them. But they didn't know in advance in exactly which way, and what they saw allegedly went beyond anything they ever imagined in even their worst of nightmares.
Will you check under the bed and make sure there's no Disney executives under there?
I promise there's not.
I'm scared, Mom. Will you please just look and make sure Kathleen Kennedy isn't under my bed?
We don't understand it, sir. We keep making the same movie over and over and pandering to everyone, but suddenly it's not working.
Then we've got to pander harder.
Look, I don't want to have to say it, but I think the problem is Kathleen Kennedy.
Put a chick in it, make her gay.
Put a diverse woman in it, make it gay.
But Mrs. Kennedy, Bambi's a baby deer.
Fuck baby dear, put a chick in it, make her gay.
From now on, we're only going to make original content that doesn't pander.
Sure we will, Kate. Sure we will.
The behind-the-scenes response then at Disney was a mix of shock, embarrassment, feelings of betrayal, and overall butthurt. There apparently were some lines of communication between Disney and Paramount over the course of the weekend, but from what I gather, very little constructive came out of it, as apparently many in Disney's end were a tad emotional, especially the true believers of the woke cause, as South Park just gave it a black eye. That minor lip service that was paid towards criticizing YouTubers and those who would send Kathleen Kennedy hate mail was apparently very little consolation. As for Kathleen Kennedy herself, she reportedly did not take it well, not at all. At this point in her career, she is, allegedly, even more about preserving her legacy than about changing the world, and one of her big worries is that the South Park image of her, and the corresponding portrayal, forever will tarnish her legacy. From everything we've heard, Miss Kennedy is quite the piece of work. She takes everything personally, and she allegedly reacts with anger, lashing out. sometimes through intermediaries. And someone still very high on her shit list, especially after the tweet comic book movie described as bizarre and unhinged, is Gina Carano. Before we move on, let's briefly revisit that tweet, because it's going to play a part in what is to come. The tweet, which later would be described as unhinged and bizarre, is neither, because it makes references to events that are objectively verifiable, and on top of that, it gives an insight into the managerial style of Kathleen Kennedy. And we have heard of several others that have similar experiences. Carano's tweet begun, "This is the part where KK demands any YouTubers get censored off of YouTube for sharing and laughing at this hilarious episode." Well, there certainly are a number of ex-YouTubers, once rising stars, who suddenly got their channels shut down for no good reason, who are of the opinion that their criticism of Kathleen Kennedy's Lucasfilm and Star Wars might have had something to do with it. Moving on, Carano said, "She'll have YouTube disable the thumbs down option because of the ratio she'll receive." And this happened, and it happened in the days after Carano was fired. That's when Kennedy did the video for the Oscars, you know, the one where she read "Fade in" from the teleprompter. That video got ratioed to high heavens. Not for the fade in, but for the firing of Gina Carano, and very shortly thereafter, the dislike button disappeared from YouTube. Carano continues, "Then she'll have her publicist ghouls make sure Variety and The Hollywood Reporter run hit pieces about the South Park creators and their families, smearing their names through every useful idiot she has under her thumb." This also happened, and it happened to Gina Carano. Shortly after she was fired, The Hollywood Reporter ran a story which implied that not Gina herself, but that her family had mafia connections. That was certainly the impression the article wanted to impart onto the reader, without explicitly stating it, because that would have gotten them sued. The Hollywood Reporter had no reason to write such an article, going after Carano's family and even name specific family members, unless it came at the behest of the office of Kathleen Kennedy. And if it did, that would be petty to the extreme. Continuing her description of Kennedy's MO, Carano said, "She'll activate her online mob to repeat that the South Park creators are racist, bigot, transphobes." Well, that definitely happened before, as all sequel trilogy stans, meaning Kennedy chills, went after Carano at the time, and they still do, because a sequel trilogy stan of note came after her for this tweet. A content creator who is getting views in the double or low triple digits, but who still gets interviews with modern Star Wars alumni, accused Gina Carano of having lost her mind because of this tweet attacking Kathleen Kennedy. But to this allegation, Carano provided a lengthy response. I recommend you find it on X and read it all yourself, but for now, let's stick to the bits most specifically about Kathleen Kennedy. Carano said, "If I were the head of one of the most powerful entertainment companies in the world, I would know that haters come with the territory and that maybe the haters are expressing their thoughts because they actually care, and caring is a good thing. Because as long as they care, well hey, we still have something to work with. Maybe we can win their hearts back eventually, and maybe they do have some good things to add to the conversation, which they do and did, and at the very least, they're still buying the product. Look at Mando Season 1. Boom. The healing had begun. If you are a proper good leader, you learn how to embrace and communicate, not dictate and silence and demand your actors and directors unfollow and shame more than half of your fan base, and the people who have stuck with the franchise for decades. And obviously, this is exactly what Lucasfilm under Kennedy has done. Side note, don't say the Force is female and then allow only the men to express their political views online. Here I have to add though that Kennedy probably will allow women to express their political views online too, provided of course that they harbor the views Kennedy deems to be the correct ones. Anyway, Carano continues telling the shill who attacked her. One of the problems your overlords are having now is that they've made a lot of people completely stop caring about one of the most beloved franchises in history. All by bullying, pushing aggressive agendas, and trying to silence the people criticizing them. How are they able to tell stories they don't understand when the ones they identify with are the Empire? They are literally trying to squash the little guys, the rebellion. No wonder the storytelling is struggling. And here's an important point. One of the best things about this franchise is passing it from generation to share. The competition is too high to throw out something as valuable as that. But why would one generation pass it on when you've disrespected and thrown them away? Addressing Disney directly, she said, for this moment they have heard the people's voice and it shook them. They're choosing to stick with their weak leadership who couldn't handle YouTubers saying mean things online. When all it would have taken is a true leader to step in, take the reins, take some responsibility, stop discriminating, apologize about the things that have been done wrong, step completely out of politics, be truly inclusive, and they'd be back in business. Until then, they're stuck with you, the yes men, and their plummeting stock. Those are not just wise words, they are a stringent criticism of Disney's senior management. Because they chose to stick with Kathleen Kennedy, despite her, in Carano's apparent assessment, clearly being an incompetent executive and a toxic manager with an authoritarian and a tyrannical bent. Addressing the Kennedy chill which set off this entire tweet, Carano said, "One of the things your overlords asked me to do was to unfollow certain accounts because they said bad things about Kathleen Kennedy. That was a huge red flag for me. As well it should be. While every media company needs a social media policy which states what employees can say in public, unless you're working with matters concerning national security, your boss telling you who you can or cannot be following and thus even have interactions with online based on nothing but how thin-skinned they are is a wild overreach. But based on everything Carano has said here, which lines up perfectly with everything else we've heard about Kennedy over the years, this would appear to be in character for her. Remember Ellen DeGeneres? Everyone thought she was so nice and kind, until it was exposed that in reality she had been something of a monster to work around, and at times even be around, and she'd been that way the whole time. That did not just end her career, it ended her legacy. I'm not saying the two are the same, but apparently, like Ellen, Kennedy also has some rather unsavory sides to her as well. And according to, shall we say, sources close to Gina Carano, there are receipts to prove this, and many of them. And what should have Kathleen Kennedy worried is that apparently Gina Carano isn't done with this fight just yet. For Lucasfilm, South Park joining the Panderverse might not be over just yet. Instead, it might herald a new era of scrutiny and questioning they have never been subjected to before. We will, of course, keep you up to speed as this develops, but for now, let me know your thoughts on this in the comments.